There's one thing I like to do when using boilies, and it's something that I've done for a number of years, going all the way back to when I was a kid and I used to roll my own bait. And it's a simple process of coating your boilies in liquids and then rolling them in powders to give them a little crispy coating on the outside. You can buy boilies that are ready made like this these days, or you can do it yourself. And doing it yourself, you know, it's plenty easy enough to do. So the way I go about doing it is to remove my bait from the freezer. And I normally take my bait out a couple of days before I'm going to use it. And I leave it outside so that just a few little white specks form. Now, a lot of people will think when they see that on their bait, the bait's going mouldy, they can't use it anymore. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. And actually, I use my bait like this 99% of the time. The only reason I use my bait properly fresh out the freezer is when I'm grabbing it in a bit of a rush. I haven't planned my session, you know, it's a last minute thing. So once the bait has formed the white specks, you're then ready to start applying the liquids and powders to it. And the first thing that I apply to the boilies I'm using here are 15mm Atlantic Heat. And like I just said, the first thing I do is apply something called liquid fish. This is a very thick, gloopy, dark coloured liquid. It's almost a blacky brown. It absolutely stinks. I don't know what's in it, but it's definitely of fish origins. It stinks like hell. And the first thing I do is coat the boilies with that. You don't need too much of this. It's easy to put too much on. You need to make sure you don't do that. So just enough to lightly coat the bait, enable you to stick your powders to them after that point. So the first powder I'm going to apply is green lip mussel powder. It's a very fine powder, and when you open the lid, quite often you get a little puff of it pop out. You know, it's very fine, and just a little coating of that. Again, you don't need to put too much on, so pour it into the bucket over the top of the boilies. Try to coat them as evenly as you can, and then shake them around in a bucket, making sure, similar to the green lip mussel, it's a very fine powder, different colour, but the same kind of thing, really fishy. And again, like I said, another very fine powder will stick to the boilies really well. So coat them once more, shake them around again until, like before, the boilies are still wet, still able to grab the other powder, the final powder of the three. And once you've done that, then add your third powder. And the third one is sea stim powder. This stuff tastes absolutely lovely. No idea what it is, but it's almost like beef gravy, something like that. It really is nice to taste. So if you do get some, have a little try, you might be impressed. Coat the boilies in that, shake them around, and this time around, you want the boilies to dry off. So when you're done with it, rather than them still being wet, you want them to almost appear dry. Once you have them at that stage, or if you get to the point where they're not quite dry enough, you can of course go back, you can add some of the other powders as well. If you don't want to go mad with a sea stim, put a bit more green lip mussel or a bit more crustacean powder on there. But the idea is to get the boilies nice and dry. Once you've done that, a very small amount of hot fish oil goes into the bucket. Shake them around once more. Again, you don't want them to go back wet, you just want them to just about absorb that oil so it coats them all. Once you've done that, the boilies can be left in a bucket or put straight in the lake, but the best way really is to give them a few hours before you apply them. But like I say, you can give it 2 days before you apply them, you can give it 2 minutes, it doesn't really matter, but the longer you leave them, the harder that crust will form and the better it will stay on as it falls through the water onto the bottom. And once it reaches the bottom of the lake, you've got all sorts of stuff going on there. The powders will break down, they'll disperse into the water, so will the liquids, and you've effectively transformed your boilies, which were perfectly usable out the bag and will catch you loads of carp, but you've just taken them to another level without too much messing around.
My angling over the last decade has pretty much been the same really, or it's involved the same sort of tactic. It's normally a bucket of bait, 3 rods onto one area. But as the lakes are getting more and more pressured, I've obviously not had to necessarily adapt and overcome trying a different method, because I'm still fishing the same way today as what I did say 10 years ago. But what I've done is I've changed the mix ever so slightly. Now you would have seen in January I was using Manila, mulching it up, adding sweet corn to it and fishing a tiny little hook bait over the top. Pretty much nothing has changed from the session here today in the middle of summer on Oxleys, other than the fact that I've just switched over to krill. Now, I use the mulched up boilies for a couple of reasons really. We can all go to the shop, all get bait out the freezer, put it into the bucket, and there you go, you've got your bucket of bait. But when you're turning up to a lake and you're putting fresh bait on top of old bait, you know, you're asking a lot of the fish to eat fresh bait straight away. So I soak the boilies. Now I normally soak them sort of 24, 36 hours prior to coming. So I just get an empty bucket. I don't go mad with them, probably say 2 kilos. fill the bucket up with water and add a generous helping of matching liquid. So this time around, in the warmer months, I've gone for krill. Put the lid on, and I'm not even too bothered if they get hot and the bucket starts to swell, where the boil is almost sort of fermenting, if you like, because what I want is I want the boilers to be as soft as they can possibly be. As soon as I get to the lake, crack the bucket open, pour the water out. There's enough boilies in there to make your starting mix off with. All I do is grab the boilies, mulch them up in between my hands, so you're making almost like a real heavy, dense ground bait. And all you're adding to that is hemp and sweet corn. Now, these types of waters, they're quite large waters. As soon as a wind picks up on them, you get a big undertow pull in, and I see people, they're adding pellets to their mix, they're adding sort of crushed boilies and a lot of flake boilies to their mix. When you're actually putting the bait out, I see it more often than not that their bait is actually just drifting away. So the bait they're putting out isn't actually going where their free rods are underneath. But by mixing or mulching the boilish water, I know that it's going down, and ultimately when you're fishing free rods on a spot, the biggest key is that your free rods are out there and that your bait is going directly over the top. I don't want to be putting bait out and it's washing away into, say, next door swim or a few feet off the spot. So I know with that mix, as soon as I put it out there, spom it out, it's going bang on where I'm fishing, and I can hone the fish into one area, and as soon as they come in, my free hook baits are underneath. Which then leads me on to the rigs. Now, this style of fishing is very, very basic. I'm creating a feeding frenzy, trying to draw as many fish into an area as I possibly can, and I'm not looking to tie the most complicated rig, and the action can be, it can be real fast paced. And I'm not one for sharpening hooks either, and I think if you're sat there sharpening your hooks, worrying about your hook point too much, trying to tie a fancy rig, you can miss opportunities, and I've seen people do it, and I know the more you mess around with stuff like that, the less time your rods are in the water, which therefore means the less chance you've got of catching fish. So the rig that I've used for probably the past 18 months, which I would say, it's very hard to pinpoint one thing that's like rocketed your own angling, but it's working, so I'm not going to change it. It's a very, very basic fluorocarbon D-rig. I've literally got 12 to 14 inches of 19-pound Illusion, which is a reel line, a size 4 wide gape hook, and a tiny micro hook ring swivel on the back of that. And then that just allows me to use any option of a hook bait. So in the winter, you'd have seen me using a piece of foam with a couple of maggots on top. This time around, a 12mm yellow manila pop-up that I've glugged up, so it's super high powered, and I'm literally just shaving the edges off of that, checking it in the margins, and having that so it's just slowly sinking when it goes out. I don't want it hitting the deck, I don't want it so it hits the corn, and when they're sucking that up, I don't want them to then come across a hook bait that's a little bit heavier. So keeping everything nice and basic, having a super, super critically balanced hook bait, and fishing over a mix that really couldn't be any simpler. It's literally mulched up manila in the winter and mulched up krill in the summer. And that is how I've been catching fish in the winter and also here today on Oxleas. Hell. One trick pony I may be, but it's a good trick to have. It'd be nice if a fucking real big one just appeared. What's it gonna be? Have a nice looking 20 pounder, I'd say, mid-20. In he goes. Beautiful. It's probably the biggest one of the session so far. Well, there's a nice fish, that is. Well, there he is, another rather pretty Oxleas double. Again, this one was part of 2 bites in real quick succession. This was the first one, and I got one in the net over there that's a little bit bigger than this one. So I'll slip this one back and I'll show you the bigger one.
So perhaps a very good point to start off this discussion is why have I kept my interest going for so long, and what will this bring to the party in 2021-22? Well, I'm still really interested in bait and ingredients and in researching bait and ingredients. I suppose it runs through me like a stick of rock. You know, break my arm and it would have flavours this side and ingredients the other. And I think what really motivates me is that you never stop learning. And you never stop learning about what carp like, what they eat, what they prefer. And I'm a great believer, particularly in the last few years, that carp are very, very interested in the flavours and aromas that appear naturally in nature. And there are people that might say, well, what relevance has this possibly got to carp bait? Well, the fact is that I believe the evolution of carp, which obviously is many millions of years longer than human beings, and carp are spread throughout the world, carp and carp-related species, they've come to understand and accept that certain food items are very appealing to them because they've had to eat food that comes into their watery domain, drops off the trees, comes in through, you know, through bushes, elderflower, elderberry, cherries, plums, name all the fruits, nuts that fall in the water. There are fish in the Amazon that eat nuts. So, you know, fish have got to survive. They'll eat anything to survive, which then would mean that they are attracted to all the lakes and riverbanks, which would be blackberries. And we go blackberrying in the autumn, in the late summer and autumn, so we can make blackberry and apple pie. You see people on the hedgerows and roadsides taking blackcurrant. Well, in blackcurrant, there are multiple layers of aroma chemicals. When they're analysed, there are all sorts of esters, aldehydes, and complex flavour compounds which we can copy perfectly in a laboratory and put them into a flavour. So when you say, why is that flavour better than another? Why do carp like it? They like it because it's not just mimicking, but it is copying that which appears in nature. And I'm absolutely fascinated by this. And that is just one aspect of it. And you then come to the spices and the natural extracts, oleoresins, things like clove, cinnamon, onion, garlic. There's such a whole host of what they're broadly called is culinary flavours and ingredients. And of course, the development that has been done over many years for the human food industry, we can pinch that and we can use that in our baits, and I do. And so we'll be getting into more detail about this as the series unfolds, but we can actually start to be a bit specific right now. For example, when you look at why certain things work and analyse the fact that we like them, so therefore we sort of transfer that thought to say, well, maybe the carp will like it because I like it, in all the different facets that crop up. What I would like to do here is to go into just a little bit more detail. Why? Because I've been asked to, and I get lots of emails about this. And I suppose I was chatting to the guys behind the camera here with Mike and with Rich, and I was saying to them that how I am very motivated to help people who show an equal or at least equivalent level of enthusiasm for understanding bait and tactics that I do. So the more you guys want to hear me speaking, the more I'm happy to do so.
I'm just going with 2 simple D-rigs, as I know they work. I'm going to put bottom baits on. I just prefer bottom baits at this time of the year. Obviously it's quite late on in the summer now and a lot of people chuck pop-ups out, especially, I mean, it's weedy. I mean, obviously I don't know nothing about this lake. I don't know what people are doing on this lake, but I'm guessing they see a lot of pop-ups. And you know, this time of year, they've been pressured a lot all year. A lot of them have been caught. I just think bottom baits give you a better chance. And that spot's that lead on the surface, short here, which no doubt my braid's going to be running over. So the last thing I want to do is put the 2 rigs out, start spamming my bait, and potentially bring the rigs in with a spam. So I think it's safer to get the bait out and just put the rigs on top.
Right, so I'm going in with 10 spoms on each rod. The mix is pretty standard for me, real good quality. Boilies, tigers, lovely quality hemp, So I've got a nice, decent amount of food items there, but you know, enough to get a bite. I'm just going to play it by ear from there. You know, if I get a quick bite, just top the spots up. But you know, for me, 10 out there is a good starting point for this lake as we know it at the moment. So we'll see how it goes.
Nice late summer mix. We've got whole boilie, crumb boilie, sweet corn, maize, a few tigers and a bit of particle. All sorts in there. Right. So I'm trying to keep the bait pretty tight. It's not a massive area. At a guess, it's probably 6, 7 foot wide. Plenty big enough to squeeze 2 rods on. But what I don't want is, usually at this time of year, they do want a bit of bait. So we're gonna give them a bit.
That's better. Right, that's it. Absolutely bang on. Perfect, couldn't be happier. That will do for the evening.
Haha. Oh, she's a beaut. How's it going, mate?
All right, mate, you all sorted?
Yeah, eventually.
Happy days. God,
Eventually.
it's a bit of a drama, but it's good to get it done, eh?
That's it, mate.
Looking good now.
Feels good now. They're all
It's in a couple.
Definitely a few up there, isn't there? And I
Yeah.
feel like I'm probably as close to them as we can get, really.
I think so, mate, yeah. Especially if they just drift round through that island there on the way out and in, you know, good interception point, isn't it? It's like a little pinch point almost.
Yeah. Well,
So,
fingers
yeah.
crossed.
Yeah,
Fingers
let's see what
crossed.
happens. All looking good.
What I learnt really quick on there is, not being a flat bottom lake with features, you had to get it right. Accuracy was the key. You couldn't just chuck it anywhere. You'd be in like green hills or, you know, off the feature and all snailed up. So you had to find clean. And it could be the size, you know, like a bivvy to a couple of bivvies could be, you know, cleaned up. So obviously making sure he's neat on the float, you know, getting out as quick as you can, not beating it up, foaming it up really. And then obviously once you've got 3 rods around it, it's all about getting your spot out there. And obviously you can't hide on that lake, everyone can see you. And when I first went on, there was always the tales of getting Mexican waves if you got a crack off, or, you know, getting sort of friendly banter shouted out across the lake if you missed a spot and so on. So I was a little bit nervous really, but once I blanked it all out, I got into it. But before that, I sort of met a couple of guys, Patchy being one of them. He'd been on there forever really, sort of, you know, fishing the lake, and he divulged the green bucket to me really, which I was on it. You know, they were, you know, 10 years ahead in their angling, and it was basically, it built up of hemp, mainly the base of it, the special pellets that they used to get, it's, you know, an oily trout pellet. It was hard to get hold of. You used to have to go down to a feed supplier on the A1. They used to nickname it the A1 mix because it all come from the A1, like the bait, the hemp, the pellets. So that's what we got the nickname of it. And it was that with the pellets, and then your 3 tins of corn. If you was feeling really generous, a few handfuls of boilies, but it was mainly that sort of corn was the real pulling power in it. They were just educated on it to live on it, you know. So after that, it was applying it. The thing with spodding now, everyone just thinks, oh, you just dump it out there, you know, aim it, drill it down there. It's a bit of an art to it, and that's where a friend of mine, Bluey, best mate of mine, you know, fish with him, he's an angler that made me probably who I am now, you know, from his influence. Is a flat bottom spod. It's got no fins on it. It was based on a VO5 bottle design. He's one he had, but they were VO5 bottles. Drill them out, all little holes in it, and fill it with cork in the top. Now the art of it was to sort of clip up beyond your float, let it come up, you see the red top like rock and surf, then draw it back to your float. So it's like creating like a shower of your particle drawing onto your float, and you build it around it. Rather than dumping it, you start creating an area, which everyone always thought you're drilling it on the float. You didn't want to drill it always on the float, you wanted it around it obviously, but creating sort of an area with it really. Well, like you would do if you went out in a boat and chucked it out, what you're trying to do with a spod. So tooled up with Rocketeer and that, you know, a bit of an art. It's all working with the wind and that. You'd learn how to use it, and because you was using like a loose mix, if you didn't get it right, it'd fall out the back of the spod. So you used to have to make it up with the pellets, and it would just be like it's almost squeeze it, but it didn't bind. It had to still crumble. It's like you just get it right almost, and you know it's perfect. You know, it's not like concrete. It was just like a crumble to it, like an apple crumble, really. Like on the topping, you know. That's how I can describe it. So yeah, you'd apply it out the green bucket. It was like 3 kilos. It's 30 spods to give anyone an idea, and the numbers. Big spoms now, 30 big spoms, and that was like a magic go-to. Out of that, you'd probably get about 3-4 bites out of that lot if it was really going off. But that wasn't always the way to do it. And I messed up on this. Like in spring the next year, I was going in with this green bucket still, and like I should be catching, you know? I mean, I'm on fish, but there's a right time to apply these amounts of bait. And again, it was 10 spods, 10 neat spods on your float, and that was enough to get a bite because they're just waking up. It's like your single hook bait fishing, but you still got something out there. So each day, each month, times a year, you've still got to apply it right. You can't just dump this bucket in, it's got to be right. So in the height of summer, autumn, always, you just couldn't give them enough, you know. But I'd never top it up. That's one thing on there. You put your 3 rods out, you get a bite, hang the rod out. You still got 2 rods fishing, and until it come to a halt and end, then you'd re-put your rods out if you think it was the right time. But I'd never be like you see now, people topping up with spod. I'd do it now on certain lakes I fish, like especially here. You know, you sort of feed another free in because it's a different way of creating it on there. Sort of they'd hang off the features and come back onto you. So that's why you sort of would have to draw them in and get them, you know, competing again. So yeah, I learned a lot with it. But unfortunately, it's a forgotten art in my opinion now. It's sort of lakes I'm fishing, I can't use particles because the rules. That's fair enough. That's life. Nothing's ever perfect in carp fishing. But yeah, it's all a bit retired in my garage now. That kind of fishing. Circle again and dig out the boilies. So, but no, that's what I found with it. So as mentioned about my bait, it's real simple stubbing. Well, really lazy. I've just got the 11mm pellets, some cell boilies coated in oil. There's a few 18s chucked in there in the bag, just a few different sizes. Whole baits this time. Goes out nice in the spom because all those little gaps are filled. Yeah, just topped it up with 3. You don't want to go too mad and overdo it, but just to keep something in the swim, you know, a bit more smell back in, bits falling through the water. Obviously, you know, they're out there eating, it will sort of keep them coming back for more. So again, yeah, I like the theory, the ringing the dinner bell, as they say. But just enough to try and G up another bite. Like I said, we're running out of time. You got up to about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in this swim, being generous. I'm just going to try and sneak another bite. I'm just going to leave 2 rods out there. I don't want to disturb it with a lead, like I said, and hopefully get out of jail, because yeah, that's wounding, that is, getting cut off like that. So yeah, onwards and upwards. hopefully we get another chance. So tools for the job, obviously we moved on in technology. You used to use the old Rocketeers, but this is a 13-foot, 5-pound spod rod. Custom built, I've got the old K-rings on it, stock the fraps and bits. Quick retrieve reel, like I say, Daiwa spod reel. This is a competition spod reel, quick and easy to retrieve. Obviously we do like the spod and marker braid, but I've just got the marker braid on, so I use this for leading up as well. Just, you know, what I had at the time in my box actually. And then just like £60, 50.
I've always had a fascination with bait, especially boilies. Probably from in my teens really. Something about it, seeing all the older boys and that when we was fishing, they'd always, the ones that sort of was right into their bait and always have like the sort of going recipe, the, you know, experimental recipe, always be sort of head and shoulders above the other anglers on the lake. And that really sort of triggered me sort of interest into it. I suppose when I was about, I don't know, 13, 14, when I first started sort of proper carp night fishing, we'd always spend all our money on buying the base mixes and the flavours, and me and my mate would get dropped off for a week or whatever, and we'd take, you know, 24 eggs and sort of make up, you know, fresh bit of bait every day. And we just found our results when we started doing that were just far, far, far better than like fishing the little standard shelf lights at the time. So once I sort of got into like making my own and all that, mucking about home, obviously then your interest sort of sparks into the ingredient side. What's in it? What catches, you know, what makes them really want that one and not that one? And then of course that's like a Pandora's cage. And over the years, like with all my mates, like Rod Killick, he's been a great influence, Paul Forward, even right back to a guy who I got my first sort of base mixes off was a guy called Alan Smith. Alan was probably one of the sort of, you know, he's one of the best anglers in Kent at the time. He's died now, unfortunately, he died too young. But Alan basically, he used to give me, it was a bait called a savoury mix, and he introduced me to a betaine powder and a flavour called cured meat. And me and my mate was fishing like the day ticket lakes at the time, because we just got a car between us, and you know what I mean, every weekend it was somewhere different, and we absolutely hammered places with it. So of course, once you know your interest gets into what goes in it, you start learning the common denominators of certain flavours and what, you know, they'll have the same sort of group of things in them, ingredients in them. So, you know, I suppose, into my 20s, I started mucking about with my own base mixes, getting ingredients. As a guy I mentioned, Rod Killick, he was always a great help, and obviously F and a few of the other old boys. And as I sort of started learning more, I started putting my base mixes together. Suddenly you come up with something a bit more individual than what was getting thrown in. And obviously that really got my confidence up, because after that, you know, you'd sort of take this bait. It was a fish meal at the time I put together. And everywhere you sort of took it, you know, the fish would get onto it, and, you know, great bit of fishing. So since then, really, it's just, you know, I try and adopt that boilie approach to me fishing as much as I can. Again, going back to what I'm sure I've said before, if, you know, the lake's getting boilies thrown in it from everyone, then maybe I'll go down and sort of a small bait particle approach. But, you know, if I can possibly help it, that's the way for me. It's just a simple, you know, simple, straightforward and very selective way of fishing. As much as like bait, I suppose, is important as the ingredients, I would go application would probably be the next thing, or as important. You know, how you apply the bait, when you apply the bait. And I mean, we could fill our hour up talking about this, you know, where and how and when, but basically I try and sort of prime areas before I'm going to fish them. So, you know, even when I'm down on the lake, I'll sort of, the 3 or 4 likely looking places I'm seeing the fish show, I'll always make sure I trickle them a little bit of bait in the corners, give myself a plan B. So, i.e. I turn up on a lake and there's nothing really going, nothing for me really to sort of set up on. I'll drop back on one of my baited areas in the sort of nearest vicinity. In terms of amount of bait, again, it's what you're fishing for really. If you're fishing for 10 carp, you're not going to really want to give them 10 kilos. So, you know, them sort of waters, the bigger waters where the fish sort of tend to graze a bit more, a bit like sheep really, in a field, they'll obviously split up and feed a little bit all over the place. I tend to fish like little trap 6, 10 boilies. But again, other places, when it's like the smaller ponds, the spotty ones, I might, with the more fishing especially, I might put a little bit more in on one spot tighter and see if that works. But again, you know, there's so many options with it, size-wise. I've really found that they'll get on it a lot more quicker by using things like different shapes, as in dumbbells, 18, you know, like a different mixture of sizes, a few halves in with it. That's, I'd say, that can really trip them up. And again, using paste, it's not boiling them, little lumps of paste. Another great one of getting them traction straight in the water. It's just a case of doing different things with them, really, just being a little bit different to the others. I know guys like who fish the day ticket waters and that soak them in the lake water overnight. You know, so that's that washed out straight in there. Again, if I'm casting to fish in the morning, I'm seeing like a single show or couple of shows, I'm going to put a single hook bait. When I reel in that rod to move it, I won't put a fresh hook bait on. I'll keep that washed out one from the night before. Don't know if it means, you know, it helps you out, but you know, obviously that maybe that's sort of got that bit more been in the water longer sort of smell about it. But there's so much different things you can do with it.